If you have your Bibles with you this evening, you might like to turn over to the book of Ephesians, chapter 6. We're going to be speaking tonight about the evil day. There are many days in the life of a Christian, many days in the lives of everyone. There's easy days and hard days. There's good days, bad days, sick days, and tragic days. But Paul speaks of a very specific type of a day when he describes for us in the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, the preparations that we need to make. So as we look at this verse, again in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 13, therefore, take up the whole armor of God that you may be able to withstand in the evil day. And having done all, to stand. Stand therefore, having girded. So, this evil day that he's describing here, what exactly is an evil day, and are we prepared for such a day? Most of us have many possessions, and some of us take the time to do the research of what would happen if some terrible cataclysm occurred. Would this be able to survive or not? And that's what we're describing here. Some cars will take us through a head-on collision and probably will survive. Other cars would take us through a head-on collision and we would not survive. But while the days are clear and the sun is shining and everything's wonderful, you can't really tell the difference between the two cars and really doesn't make that much difference. But the person who recognizes the possibility of an evil day is going to take a little bit closer look and do that kind of research. And so when Paul speaks about this, as I say, it's like a 500-year or 100-year flood. We know it's coming. And when we buy our home, some people are very interested in the flood zone. They're very interested in what's going to happen if we have this flood. It may not happen for 5 years. It may not happen in our lifetime. But if we do have a flood, what's going to happen to the place where I live? And if that home is going to be destroyed, then we might want to rethink whether we want to buy a home like that, because sooner or later that day is going to come. Well, that's a very weak illustration in comparison to the idea of when everything in my life can go wrong all at the same time and leave me in a very vulnerable condition and put me in a situation where my faith is being tried and tested beyond what I'm able to bear. Now, God won't allow me to be put into that kind of a situation, but I can get myself entangled in a situation like that if I'm not careful. And so Paul is warning us that we need to give careful thought. Jesus describes it like this in verse 25. The rain descended. The floods came. The winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. So while the sun is shining, every house is going to stand. But when the evil day comes, some houses are going to fall and some houses aren't going to fall. We've met Christians who have fallen. People that we grew to love. People we respected. Young people that didn't make the time or put forth the time and the effort to make this kind of preparation. And as Jesus says in verse 24, we have to hear these sayings of mine and do them. That's how we prepare for the evil day. Every time you hear a sermon, every time you hear a class, every time you're reading in the scriptures, you find a situation, here's a weakness, here's a problem. I've never thought about that before. I'm not really prepared for that. What are we going to do now? Are we going to write it down? Are we going to put frontlets on our eyes? Are we going to put it on our doorposts? Are we going to write it on our hands? Are these things going to be important enough for us that we're going to take the time to prepare for it? We're hearing about this measles epidemic right now. Are many of us taking the time to think about, well, did I ever get inoculated? When was I born? There's a period of time, I think it was, 64 to 67 or something, if you were inoculated in those years. They're recommending you get inoculated again. Why? Because we have an evil day now. We have an outbreak. And if people aren't careful, they're going to come down with us. But this is child's play compared to what we're dealing with here, because as Jesus says, if we don't make that preparation, then the opposite's going to happen. Everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them. So when we see a flaw in our character, flaw in a weakness in the way we handle things, a lust that we're not handling well. Jesus deals with a lot of things in this Sermon on the Mount that he's describing here. He talks about the blessed attitudes of those who will enter into the kingdom of heaven. And we don't all have those attitudes. Sometimes it's hard for us to manifest those things. Sometimes it's hard to turn the other cheek and go the second mile. But we're setting ourselves up for a fall if we don't recognize that and start making and taking the steps to do something about it, because one of these days the rain's going to fall and the floods are going to come and the winds are going to blow. Well, how do I know that? Because, as Paul's going to tell me, it is Satan who's directing these things. And Satan knows when to bring the evil day and how to bring the evil day, just like he did with Job. Job's pressure just continued and continued and continued. Now, we don't know anything about Job. We don't know if there was something he could have done that he didn't do before he was in that situation. But God seems to indicate that Job was a very good man. But when that evil day came, he didn't handle it as well as he could have. And David didn't either. Here's David, a man after God's own heart. A man that God chooses and says, this is a man who will do all my will. That's how Paul describes it in Acts chapter 13. And yet, when that evil day came, he fell. He did not handle the winds blowing, the floods coming, and he never should have been in that situation. And that's what we have to learn. We have to learn how to know what we can handle. If we have a problem with sexual lust, like David did, we don't need to be on a rooftop. We need to be off the rooftop. And if we see some movement on the rooftop, we need to get down off the rooftop. And if we're watching television and we can see a direction something's going, we need to turn that channel. We can't just leave it because we already recognize something. And Paul actually dealt with this. And we'll talk about that in the next slide, because I thought that was the next slide. So in Ephesians chapter 6, here's the whole context of the verse. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. That's what Jesus is trying to tell us. When Jesus says these sayings of mine, he's saying these words of mine have power. If you do these sayings of mine, then when the winds come and the rains come and the winds blow and the floods come and your house is getting beat on, you're going to stand. But if you've ignored something that I've been telling you to do, you've just kind of set it aside, you haven't done it, you know it's to be done, you're going to get around to it, but you haven't done it yet, and suddenly the evil day comes. So be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might, or the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Now, the Greek word for whole armor is panoply. And in the song we sing about putting on the armor of God, we sing about the panoply of God. Well, that's what this verse of 11 is. Put on the panoply of God. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand, or may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood. What Paul is explaining to us here is that we're not just dealing with time and chance. We're not just dealing with what might happen. This isn't a 500 flood situation or a 200-year flood year situation or a 100-year flood situation. This is a malevolent being that is called the devil, and the devil is walking about seeking whom he may devour. And so in verse 12, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Now, there may be many evil days in our life, days when everything comes together at once, where we're just not prepared for it. But when those days come, we need to recognize that there were certain things we could have done and we should have done. Peter's evil day came. Let's get that down. The Lord said, Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat. Now, that's what Paul's talking about. This is the evil day for Peter. Satan is wanting to sift him like wheat. He's going to sift Judas like wheat. And Judas is not going to stand in his evil day because he didn't make proper preparation. We know he was a covetous man. We know that he was a thief. We know that he had the bag, or that he was the treasurer for those people. And what a foolish decision he made. If he knew he had a weakness like that, then he should not have taken it. And the first time he took something out of the bag, he should have said to himself, I need to give this to someone else because this isn't something that I can handle. But Peter here, Simon, indeed, Satan has asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail, and when you have turned again, strengthen your brethren. There's some fascinating information here, which we don't have enough information to really glean much from. And that is, as God asked Satan in the book of Job, where have you been? He says, I'm walking to and fro and back and forth over the earth. And what's he doing? Well, Peter says he's like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. He is looking for people to sift. He is looking for people to tempt. And he's found a weakness in Satan and an opportunity that he's going to exploit. And Jesus is warning him here. Now this, if Peter had taken warning, things would have come out a little differently. I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. When you have turned again, strengthen your brethren. When you have turned again, how far did it go? How bad did it get for Peter? But this is a terrible indictment of Peter because he'd been warned the day was coming and he didn't make any preparations at all. He didn't make any preparations at all. Jesus had told him, you're going to deny me 3 times. Now, that's what he tells us in the Sermon on the Mount. If you don't turn the other cheek, if you don't go the second mile, if you look to lust, if you become angry with your brother without a cause, if you do not have a poor spirit or you don't have some of these things, Peter sat outside in the courtyard. And a servant girl came to him saying, you also were with Jesus of Galilee. Now there's only 2 apostles in this area. One is John and the other is Peter. If Peter had been wise, realizing what Jesus had said, he would have been smart enough to say, I don't need to be here. This is not the place for me to be. This is the evil companionship. This is the way Satan is going to sift him like wheat. Verse 70. But he denied it before them all, saying, I do not know what you are saying. So Peter now has a clue. I don't need to be here. This is not a place that I should be. This is not a set of circumstances that I should allow myself to be involved in. I've just denied the Lord. And I have 2 options here. I can get out of here or I can repent, but he doesn't do either. So then what happens? Verse 71, when he had gone out to the gateway, another girl saw him and said to those who were there, this fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth. But he again denied with an oath. Now, that's a serious compounding of the sin. Now he's swearing in the name of the Lord. He is giving an oath. He is swearing by God's name, I don't know Jesus, and I'm swearing with an oath. What did Jesus say about that? A little later, those who stood by came up and said to Peter, surely you are also one of them, for your speech betrays you. Then he began to curse and swear, saying, I do not know the man. Now, Peter thinks that by cursing and swearing, he's going to convince the people he couldn't possibly have been with Jesus, but he shouldn't have been in that situation. Immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the word of Jesus and said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So he went out and wept bitterly. Now, can we learn anything from Peter here? What should Peter have done? Jesus warned him of his danger, but he took no steps to protect himself. He should not have put himself near the fire. Now, here's a critical point if we want to prepare for the evil day. And it's found in Romans chapter 13, verses 13 and 14. Let us walk properly as in the day, not in revelry and drunkenness, not in lewdness and lust, not in strife and envy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provisions for the flesh to fulfill its lusts. What exactly does that mean? It means when I know I have a sexual lust, or I know I have an anger lust, or I know I have an envy lust, I need to be careful about making provisions or putting myself into a situation where I could fulfill that. If I have these problems, I need to cut them off, is what Jesus says. If your eye causes you to stumble, if your hand causes you to stumble, if your foot causes you to stumble, cut them off. He doesn't mean cut them off. He means take care of what it is and remove it. Because as we all know, if you cut off your right hand, you still have your left hand. He's not talking about a literal cutting off. He's talking about, verse 14, don't make provisions for the flesh. The evil day is going to come if we don't take the steps to break whatever it is that could lead to it. Again, it's just like these people who do these car crash tests with these dummies. And they get done, they crash the car, they look at the bodies of the dummies, they look at the computer, and they say, okay, we need to make this seatbelt better, we need to make this column better, we need to put more metal here, we need to do whatever it is we need to do, we need to prepare for the evil day. Then they do it again. And one of the interesting things about sin is every time we sin, we have the opportunity to reflect and evaluate and try to figure out, how did I get myself into this situation and what could I do so this won't happen again? And as we figure it out, we cut it off. We cut the things off. If we have a situation where it's putting us into these kind of a habitual sins, there's things that we can do. Jesus says, I don't care if you have to cut off your hand. I don't care if that's how important whatever that thing is. I don't care if you have to pull out your eye or cut off your foot. Get rid of it. It's better to enter into life without that hand, without that foot, without that TV, without that computer, without that job, or without that entertainment that you're involved in, than it is to be cast into hell. Because you kept making provisions, and finally the evil day came, and you didn't stand. The winds came, they blew, the floods came, and you fell. Because you didn't do what these other manufacturers do. They test their products, they find their weaknesses, they remove the weaknesses, and then they give the warranty. They don't give the warranty when they know that it can't handle whatever it is they're saying it's going to do. And we need to do the same thing. And the Lord has been very clear. The Lord has said, if you hear these words of mine and you do them, you're making provisions to remove these things and getting rid of them. If you don't, then you're making provisions to keep doing them. And so that's the choice that we all have to make. 1 Peter chapter 5, be sober, be vigilant. Your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Well, who's he going to devour, and how's he going to devour them? Well, we know that there's no temptation taken you, but such as man can bear, and God will not allow him to put you into a situation that you couldn't handle. But God will allow him to put you in situations God knows you should be able to handle and you could handle, but you didn't make provisions, so you weren't able to handle it. Well, that's a whole different situation. Resist him steadfast in the faith. Well, how am I going to resist him? He knows me. I know me. I don't think Satan knows me better than I know myself. I think I have a pretty good understanding of who I am and what my weaknesses are and where I need to be and where I don't need to be. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, evil companionship corrupts good morals. It doesn't have to be a person. It can be the things we spend our time with. It can be our games. It can be our television. It can be our movies. It can be our books. It can be our entertainment. It can be our social media. It can be whatever it is that we spend so much time with. And what's it doing to our faith? Is it making us stronger? Is it weakening us? Is it helping us to become more spiritually minded? Satan is putting the pressure. We need to resist the pressure. Brethren, it's very scary out there today because the world is getting very dark. The evil companionship has become much more severe and much more dangerous. And if we're going to make it to heaven, we need to take stock of who we are and what we are, what our weaknesses are, and then we need to be careful that we don't put ourselves into a situation that we can't handle. Because the scriptures say God will not allow us to be tempted above what we're able to bear, but it doesn't say that David can't call his servants and say, bring that woman to me. It doesn't say that he will keep Peter from going to that fire and sitting down right in the middle of the heart of the enemies and having to deal with the situation that he's having to deal with. And so we need to know our weaknesses. We need to know our enemy. And we need to know our allies. And like I said, it's not rocket science. It's not difficult to figure out. We've all sinned enough to know exactly what it is that puts us into the situations that we get ourselves into. And you might tell a 15-year-old kid, hey, you don't have the wisdom yet. You don't have the experience yet. But when we get into our 20s and 30s, we start getting that experience. And at that point, we need to start plugging some of these things in and start plugging up some of these holes. Some of these holes in our character, some of these weaknesses that we have where we see the situation. And sometimes, again, the best way to resolve these things is just not to get ourselves into those situations, to remove ourselves from the temptations. So we need to keep our minds clear. That's what he says. Be sober. Keep your minds clear. Take stock. Not when you're in the middle of it, right now in the middle of services, while you're spiritually minded, or at least as spiritually minded as we're going to get is right here. And let's do a sober evaluation. What about our entertainment? What about our weaknesses? What is it that keeps these, what we call besetting sins? What is it that keeps them into our lives? And what could we be doing to minimize them or remove them? Now, some things we can do, some things we can't do. But be sober, be vigilant. That means keep your eyes peeled. Start taking stock. Start taking a look. There's an evil day lurking for all of us. We don't know when it's going to come. But when it comes, we can stand if, as Jesus said, you have heard my words and you're doing them. And as Paul said, you're putting on the whole armor of God. In Hosea chapter 4 and verse 6, though, God says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also will reject you from being priests for me. Because you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children. So even God can see whether we're really trying or whether we're just putting on a front or putting on a show. If we really want to be righteous, if we really want to be holy, if we really want to be pure, if we want to be able to withstand on the evil day, God knows our hearts. He knows whether we're really trying or not, or whether there's just some things we're not going to let go of. You know, when that rich young ruler was told, there's one thing you need to do. You need to sell all that you have, give to the poor. That was his evil day. And he went away sorrowful. Jesus had given him an opportunity to come into his disciples, to follow me. And he rejected it. I suspect and I hope that in Acts 2 or at some later point, this man had another opportunity and he made a better choice. But we've all got things like that. Things we just don't want to give up. Things that are as important to us as our hand, or as our foot, or as our eye, which is why Jesus uses those analogies. Things that are very important to us, but they are dangerous, and they are leaving us vulnerable, and they're leaving us in a situation where we are in a weakened state because we haven't taken the time to figure out what they are and to remove them. In 2 Thessalonians 2, with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth. Now, we often read this verse globally, but this verse can apply to any scripture, can apply to anything God has asked us to do that we just flat out aren't going to do, or we don't want to do, or we are not interested in doing. So, verse 11, for this reason God will send them strong delusion, that they should believe the lie, that they may all be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure and righteousness. And I've met people in the Lord's church, in the institutional churches, who have a small delusion. They're right on baptism, and they're right on many things, but they have some very contrary views on what the work of the church is, or what the responsibilities and obligations are as a Christian. And so these are things that we all have to recognize. It can happen to anybody. I've met people in the conservative churches of Christ that do the same thing. That's just the way that Satan works. So in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 5, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. He's just finished talking about a lot of the key Bible characters that we know and love so well. But there's so many in the Old Testament. And they give us the clear testimony of preparing for that evil day. Abraham handled Isaac and that sacrifice because he had been preparing for that day since the moment God said, I need you to leave I need you to leave your country and go to a land that I will show you. And Abraham went. And then he patiently waited. And when God finally gave him the opportunity to pass through that extreme test, he passed through it with flying colors because God knew he could, and God knew he would. The Jews, on the other hand, when they came out of Egypt, did not handle their evil day well at all. And they fell because they wouldn't take education. God was trying to educate them. We're told in Deuteronomy, I think it's chapter 4, that God allowed them to hunger and God allowed them to thirst to test them. And so they could see themselves. When they start murmuring and grumbling because they don't like this or they don't like that, that ought to give them a clear indication there's something wrong with our faith. There's something wrong with my attitude and my trust in God when every time I have any deprivation at all, instead of asking humbly for God to take care of me, knowing that he can, instead I start grumbling and grousing and complaining about how rough things are and how I'd rather be back in Egypt. And when that day finally came, when those 10 spies came back out and started talking about how bad it was, and the two people were trying to influence in the right direction, they made a fatal error. And they failed in that evil day and ended up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. We have them as a great cloud of witnesses also. We're surrounded by so great a crowd of witnesses, so we need to lay aside every weight. Now, these weights are the things that the Lord has asked us to be doing, but we don't want to do them. And so we've built up these rationalizations. For some people, it's attendance. For some people, it's prayer. For some people, it's evangelism. For some people, it's some besetting sin. But there are weights that we're all carrying that we need to remove so we can keep running the race that is set before us. And we also need to remove the sins and the temptations which so easily ensnare us. Now that takes us right back to Romans chapter 12. Don't make provisions for the flesh. This sin is ensnaring me. Why is it ensnaring me? What is it in my life that keeps this sin from ensnaring me? What can I do to remove that? Is there something I can do to get rid of so that I don't have this issue? And for many of us, the answer would be yes, there's some small things we could start doing. So let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Now, each one of us has our own race, because each one of us has our own peculiar set of temptations and trials and weaknesses and struggles, and each one of us has our unique set of strengths and abilities and opportunities, and so each one of us is running our race. Jesus' race was a much deeper race than any of us will ever run. Paul's race was a much more complicated and deeper race than most of us will run. But we all run our race, and we must all run our race with endurance, having set aside the weights and having removed the sin which so easily besets us, because that's going to keep us from the evil day, or it's going to help us to get through and be successful on the evil day. Looking unto Jesus, we've looked at the great cloud of witnesses in verse 1, and that's describing all of the Old Testament Bible characters, good and bad, who would testify to us, don't do this, and don't do that, and do this, and it'll work. Now we look unto Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, or the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So how did Jesus handle his evil day? Well, the same way he'd handled every other. He had been training himself in being righteous and in being obedient to God, and when that opportunity came, he succeeded. He endured the cross, despising the shame. Verse 3, consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin. Now we're back to cutting it off. Cutting off your hand, cutting off your foot. Jesus and God have great expectations that we will handle our sacrifices even to the point of physical life. But we have to be trained. You can't jump from being a worldly person to dying for the Lord just in one leap. We take baby steps to get us there. And we can all get there. In Ephesians chapter 6 now, we come back to it, and we look at the passage here. Remember, he said that if you want to stand in the evil day, if you want to do all to stand, put on the whole armor of God. Well, what exactly is the armor of God? Well, he says we need to gird our waist with truth. Sanctify them in truth. Your word is truth. So if I'm going to gird my waist with truth, that means I need to know the Scriptures. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. We need to be reading the Scriptures. We need to be attending classes, taking notes, gaining information. It isn't just the information that's being put out, it's the information that's coming in. We have to learn it. Some people have been Christians for many, many years and they still really don't even know the basics because they aren't taking it seriously. They're not taking the time to learn these things. If you're going to gird your waist with truth, then the first step is knowing the Scriptures. You shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. What? If you abide in my word, you will be my disciples indeed. You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. So when Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7 there, that if we hear his words and do them, then we've girded our waist with truth. But if we've heard his words and we haven't learned them or we're not doing them, we have not yet girded our waist with truth. So, girding our waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness. Now, righteousness, of course, means treating people fairly. It means turning the other cheek and going the second mile. It means doing unto others as we would have others do to us. It means love your neighbor as yourself. It means love as I have loved you. Greater love has no man than this, that he would lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I have commanded you. So the breastplate of righteousness means that we are making no provisions to the flesh. And we are prepared for the evil day because whenever there's an opportunity to choose being fair or unfair, we're educating ourselves, we're making sacrifices, and we're preparing ourselves. Verse 15, having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Well, how do I prepare myself in the gospel? Well, Paul's just stated back in chapter 4, verse 11, that Jesus gave apostles and prophets and evangelists and shepherds and teachers to perfect the saints for the work of ministering to the building up of the body of Christ. So, preparation in the gospel means that we are utilizing the gifts that God has given. And we are utilizing them for the purpose of growth. And so, preparation. How prepared am I? How much do I really know about the Scriptures, about the plan of salvation, about myself, and the commands and responsibilities that I have as a Christian? God's watching that carefully. And if we think we can go before him on the judgment day and say, Lord, I didn't handle my temptations very well, but you know how much I love you, when he can see that I haven't girded my loins with truth, I have not put on the breastplate of righteousness, and I have not prepared myself or shod myself with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Verse 16, above all, taking the shield of faith. Well, faith comes by hearing. And hearing the word of Christ or the word of God. So we're back to it again. As a matter of fact, as I've analyzed these, the whole armor of God, it really comes down to one thing: knowing the Scriptures, knowing how to use the Scriptures. Handling, how did Paul tell Timothy that give diligence to present yourself approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, handling aright or cutting a straight line with the Scriptures. In other words, the Scriptures are the pattern. We put the pattern over us and we cut around and we make ourselves look like what the Scriptures say we're supposed to be. We make the church look like what the church is supposed to look like. We make our lives look like. We make our families look like. We make our husband and wife relationship look like what it's supposed to look like. What it's put into the Scriptures. So we have girded our waist with truth. And we have put on the breastplate of righteousness. And now we have the shield of faith. Well, what does faith mean? Well, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith is the ability to trust in the Lord with all our heart and not lean on our own understanding. In all our ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct our paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. We can do that. And this is all part of the evil day. Remember, I didn't put it, but the verse before, stand therefore, says, having done all to stand, putting on the whole armor of the panoply of God, and this is the panoply of God. So, take the shield of faith with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. The fiery darts, of course, can be anything that Satan uses to bring us down. It can be our lusts. It can be our weaknesses. It can be our doubts. It can be our evil companions. It can be the activities we're involved in. Whatever darts he throws, the shield of faith will quench them. That's what the Hebrew writer was talking about. Verse 17, take the helmet of salvation. Do we believe we're saved? Are we working towards salvation? Are all of our sacrifices really being made? Because I want to get through this life. I want to stand before God on the judgment day and hear, well done, good and faithful servant. It's the most important thing in our life. Seek first His kingdom, His righteousness. Everything else is going to be added. It doesn't matter. Everything else, as Paul said, we brought nothing in, we can't take anything out. Or as Job said, we came in naked, we're going out naked. These things don't matter. What matters is the salvation of our souls. But Peter says it's possible to forget the cleansing of your old sins. It's possible for the evil day to take its toll to the point where the joy of salvation or the helmet of salvation is gone. And so just how important today, yesterday, this week, this month, this last year has salvation been in the decisions that we're making regarding our entertainment, regarding our lives, regarding our priorities. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. Praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, being watchful to this end with all perseverance and supplication for all the saints. So I think that as we look at that passage, we can have a pretty good indication here. Do I have the armor of God or not? Is it as strong as it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago? What am I doing? What choices am I making? What situations in my life need to change? You know, as we live our lives as Christians, we don't stay static. We're either getting stronger or getting weaker. And as we live our lives, we recognize that. Something's wrong here because I'm not as strong as I used to be. What's happened here? What's going on? Well, what am I doing? Am I not reading the Bible as much? Am I not associating with Christians as much? Am I not involved in thinking about spiritual things as much? Have I gotten a new job? Have I gotten involved in TV or some other activity that is sapping the strength away? We need to be able to look at that. And then we need to make a decision. But we have to stay fluid. We have to stay flexible. We have to stay constantly paying attention and not allowing these things to just creep up on us, because that's how it works. That's exactly how it works. And so, as we finish our lesson this morning, or this evening, I think that all of us now can make a decision and decide whether, this sermon was great, came at a good time, and I feel really good. I'm doing about as much as I can be doing, or maybe we're saying to ourselves right now, maybe some things will slip a little bit. Maybe there's some things I shouldn't have been doing that I've been doing that I need to stop doing. Maybe there's some things I've been doing that I had been doing that I haven't been doing recently. It's not that difficult. As I say, it's not that complicated. God is very, very open and honest with us about, and we can figure it out if we do these things. So if there's anyone in the audience now, having heard this lesson, who feels like a change needs to be made, this is your opportunity to make the decision about what you want to do. And if there's anyone in the audience who at this point in life needs to obey the gospel or who needs to repent publicly of their sins, we give you that opportunity right now while we together stand and sing.